Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So we have reached now the 10th session. In our course on marriage. And the subject for today revolves around the issue of finding a spouse. We're going to deviate completely from where the book is at. The book is talking about how we should spiritually prepare ourselves. And it is talking about the importance of prayer and asking Allah for help and guidance and so on and so forth. And I wanted to say that that is extremely important, to ask Allah for guidance, to prepare ourselves properly in everything that we need to do to prepare for marriage, to understand our strong points and our weak points and where it is that we need to work on ourselves. But one of the things that is important to understand, that this issue of finding a spouse, how do we go about it, has become one of the most complicated issues that we're facing in today's time. Too many of us, we find in the process of trying to find a spouse, we encounter hardship. And so a lot of people, they look at the whole process of trying to get married as something to be extremely difficult because of what it is that they face when it comes to trying to find a spouse. They face great difficulty, or they face a number of different issues when they're speaking to people and so on and so forth. Maybe a person is not psychologically ready. Maybe a person is not economically ready. Maybe a person is not serious about marriage. There's incompatibility, so on and so forth. But one of the things that is challenging, if you're able to get to the point of talking to someone, one of the things that's challenging is actually finding out how it is that you can meet people. That's a big problem, not only in the Muslim community, but overall. In the past, things were easier from the angle of people finding a potential spouse in the community that they belonged in, whether it was the neighborhood, or whether it was families knowing each other, or whether it was the masjid, and so on and so forth. But in today's time, we find that people have difficulty in finding someone to marry. And it is because the places that they have to look are very limited. So a lot of people have turned to the internet for this. They've turned to the internet to try to find a spouse. And it's possible that you can find a spouse by way of the internet, but that needs a whole discussion in what are the best ways to utilize the internet to find a potential spouse. I wanted to come back to an important point that I want to push, and that is the importance of the masjid. Unfortunately, because of our lack of attachment to the masjid for one reason or another, we miss the opportunity of what it means to be a Muslim community, what it means to deal with each other and get to know each other, what it means to be in a space wherein we're growing in our relationship with Allah and each other, and what should be a space for us, especially in the US, where we can network and potentially find a spouse, or our masjid can help us in the process of working with other masajid. The masjid, by no means, in my estimation, is the least place that we should be looking, but actually it should be the place that we start off with. It should be the community that we belong to, that we're tied into, that we invest in, that we associate with. That is the first place that we go when we're looking for a potential spouse. Some others, their family systems help them in that, and many don't. But the masjid community should have as a priority to prepare people for marriage, not just to push marriage on people, because this is one of the problems that some people encounter, especially converts that are new. When they come to the community, immediately you find people are pushing them into marriage and they're not ready, or they're not in the right state of mind. And so that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is to belong to a community which understands the importance of marriage, and wherein its members are preparing themselves on every level to get married, and the community itself facilitates the process of marriage by understanding what marriage demands, what Islam is looking at, and having an understanding of the separation between culture and Islam. And there are programs and there is attention given to the whole idea of facilitating for people to find each other, or for people to be matched, or for people to be able to inquire. There's not one way in terms of finding a spouse, but what is the issue that people confront is, where do I go? And as we mentioned, in today's time, the solution for many people has been focused on the issue of utilizing the internet, but that needs its own discussion and training. So we say that, our masajid should be the places that we begin. And it should not just be the issue that we're asking the imam, but it should also be the issue that in the community, there's an understanding that we should be supporting and helping those who are looking to be married, especially the young people, because they, unlike older people who may have had experience in getting married, the young people are beginning, and they should not be left out into the in the world alone trying to figure out these things. But the community should be a community of support. And the reason why we mention being a community that understands marriage and what it means to be prepared to get married is because many times what happens also is that when we don't have a good knowledge of Islam, we begin to confuse culture for the reality of Islam. And so we make things difficult. And so, for instance, in the case of divorcees, people that are divorced, if a community doesn't have a solid grounding or rootedness in Islam, then those people who are seeking to remarry will have a certain type of label. And that's why it's important for us to prepare ourselves and to look at what it is that are our strengths and our weaknesses, and how it is that we need to orient ourselves to marriage, what it is that we need to do. Those things are extremely important. The other issue that we mentioned, is part of a community itself, and I had mentioned the masjid, but we have to look at our networks. We have to look at our networks, and we have to encourage that within our friends' networks, that as Muslims, we support each other in what is good. And so part of that support is that we look out for those who are not married, and we're in a position to suggest. Now, what I'm saying is something that comes with a lot of responsibility, and a lot of people don't want to engage it. That's the issue of helping people to get married, because if something goes wrong, they don't want the responsibility that comes from that. But what is happening on the other side is that because we're not open as we should be on this type of issue, open in the sense of being very clear that there's a need, and being very clear that we have to be responsible to address that need, people are being left to themselves to deal with this issue, finding a spouse, and they're falling into depression, or they begin to doubt themselves or that they could ever get married. And also, what begins to be the case is that some begin to engage actions which are prohibited versus in engaging that which is allowable, because they find the reality of getting married to be difficult, and they find the reality of being alone to also be difficult. And so people are very lonely and full of despair. And so as a way to address that, they're falling into situations in which what goes on in those situations are actions that are prohibited. When it comes to the youth, especially, when we talk about finding a spouse, we as a community, as families, as friend networks, so on and so forth, we have a responsibility to the youth to facilitate for them, to educate them, to prepare them, but also to facilitate for them. And part of the facilitation process is that we learn how to create spaces wherein youth, they feel safe to be able to get to know a potential spouse. Of course, we're talking about this being governed by Islamic principles, but sometimes in the idea, confronting the idea that interaction between the sexes is prohibited, we go to the extreme that we don't allow people to have opportunities to engage the whole process of seeking to find a spouse. So that's why we have to be aware of the needs of our youth. And that's why we have to create opportunities for our youth to get to know one another and to show what their character is so that they can be recommended, so that our youth can find interest in each other when it's the appropriate time and is the appropriate stage for marriage. And so that means that, how to find a potential spouse has a lot to do with us as a community learning what our role is and ensuring that marriage is a central institution for us. That's extremely important. And so with that, people, we come to an end, and we'll touch on this subject once again next week, the whole issue of the internet and finding a spouse. But for this week, we wanted to talk about the role of the community, the role of the masjid. We wanted to talk about the role of friend networks. And we want to encourage those who are looking. And we want to say that you have to take the initiative, because we as a Muslim community are still growing and understanding what is our role and our responsibility. And we as believers believe in the institution of marriage. We believe in the contractual agreement between the male and the female. That's why it's important for us to prepare our people properly so that they're ready for that responsibility, the responsibility that we call marriage, not only on the economic level, but on the spiritual level, on the psychological level, on the interpersonal level, on the commitment level, and so on and so forth. And so until next time, people, assalamu alaikum.